Hey guys, this is Ibis Fernandez with ToonTitan.com, and we've been having a little bit of difficult technical difficulties in today's stream. There was a lot of stuff that went wrong, frame dropping, lags, delays on the stream and everything. So I felt the need to just kind of go ahead and start this fresh with a better, like more optimized system, which is kind of what we're talking about today. Optimization and raster and vector graphics. One of the things that I see that people are not paying attention to when creating content for use inside of Crazy Talk Animator is the optimization side. A computer's processor and memory is taxed very severely when you are producing content. The more stuff you put into a project, the more the processor has to work. So whether you're using raster graphics, bitmaps, or you're using vector graphics, you're going to run into these issues. It's not just a matter of quality, whether you can zoom in on a character and see like a nice crisp image versus a jagged blurry image. It's also about optimization. And we're going to get into that right away, because I want to be able to have this video be nice and efficient, and have you guys, if you find it useful, be able to share it, reference it whenever you need to. So I'm going to switch to my graphics tablet. There we go. And open up Flash. So first of all, let's talk about vector graphics. Vector graphics are not actual graphics. I don't know if that makes any kind of sense. They're a series of mathematical equations. They're plot points, so the way that I like to describe it is that, okay, we have our coordinate system. That's X, goes from left to right, and that's Y, it goes from top to bottom. So whenever I'm actually creating a piece of vector artwork, what I'm doing is I'm just telling the computer to plot a series of points, okay? Where it's like, okay, X 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. by Y 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and so on, right? So I can say I need to plot a point at X2 by Y2 that goes to X7 by Y6, and this point is going to have this is going to be a line that's going to curve all the way up to here, go here, and eventually end up there. So all I'm doing is mapping out a path between 2 points. That's a vector. And that vector contains curvature information. And in terms of vector graphics, it also contains size information, brightness information, color information, and so on. So we don't need this anymore. That's basically all that we're doing when we're dealing with vector graphics. So here I'm going to draw this line. All right. If I take a look at the line itself, it's telling me where it is, the position within the stage, how wide, how tall it is. It's telling me information such as the thickness, how thick it is, the color, what color it is. That's what the properties panel, and how it's being rendered on the edges, whether it has the round caps, or if it's a square, or whether it has any kind of information on the edges at all, and so on. So vector art is basically just a series of math, and what's going on is that your computer is having to render this this series of plot points at a really high frame rate. So if your computer is if your monitor is running at like 60 hertz, that's about 60 frames per second, 120 frames per second and so on. Okay, even if your project is set up to be like 12 frames per second, 24 frames per second, it is still rendering it at those high velocity frame rates. A lot of that is controlled by your processor and your video card. So this line is literally being drawn at least 60 times per second, right? And in order, and it's a very basic line. It only consists of 2 points, but you can have complexity added to it by adjusting the curvature of that line and telling it how to curve. While still maintaining just 2 points. Okay. Now this is just a single line. Now the more complex the artwork becomes, the more points you require in order to create the artwork. So here I have sort of an eye. So this little shape here, if we take a look at the points that was used to create it, we can see that there's a lot of points being created in order to render out this image. And this image is literally being rendered for us at a high velocity, like at least 60 frames per second in the US, you know. Different monitors work at different refresh rates. The higher your monitor, the more it involves. A lot of that involves your monitor's processor. It has to, like, there's nothing. The monitor refresh rate doesn't really affect too much. It does have a little bit of correlation between your video card and stuff, but ultimately the processor is what's involved in having to render this at a high velocity. So even if we bring down that notion, you know, that 24 frames per second, if we use that for simple math purposes and think of our processor having to render this 24 frames 24 times every second, that's still a lot of points that it's having to calculate, a lot of curves that it's having to calculate. And even if it's not moving, it's still rendering it at that speed. And that's what allows us to be able to zoom in. Look, it zoomed in almost instantly. We did not lose the quality. The edges looked exactly the same. They look nice and crisp. So every time we do something with this graphic, every time it's having to be re-rendered, the software is basically recalculating all of those little plot points, all those little vector points and curves, and redrawing them for us on the fly, which is how we end up with perfectly crisp images. Let's see here. Okay, videos. All right, so that's how we end up with those images. With Bitmap Graphics, on the other hand, we are dealing with a series of data that has been pretty much mapped out to be as precise as possible. The pixels have pretty much been mapped out against the canvas. They're going to be static every single time. This pixel right here is always going to be black. That little pixel right there in the middle is always going to have that semi-transparent black. There's that one right there is always going to be brown. It's always going to be 1 pixel by 1 pixel wide. They have been mapped out. It's always going to be at that part of the screen, and therefore it's not re-rendering it in real time for us. All right, so that's why, since it's not being re-rendered, we end up with these blocky, jagged, blurry images. Your video processor, your video card has a lot of work that it can unload on you, but not everybody has the same video card. This image, for example, when I zoom in on it, my video card is also compensating for this effect. So it's trying to create some what's called anti-aliasing, where it's trying to blend as much as possible those neighboring pixels, but it's only so much that it can do, and not everybody has a really nice quality graphics card in their machine to do that for them. Most people will see like really heavy jagged edges on this thing. So the biggest thing that we need to kind of take a look at, let's see here, my live videos, what do we have? All right, we have that. Make sure this thing is broadcasting properly. It looks like it is. So that's good. All right, so if anybody has any questions while we're doing this, you know, just feel free to throw them my way. We'll answer them while we're doing this. Perfect. So everything seems to be working fine. Just making sure, because we had a lot of technical difficulties earlier, and we want to avoid that as much as possible this time around. So again, we're going to be going to Photoshop this time. We have this picture of Billy. This is a bitmap based image, okay? There's a lot of things that vector graphics can't do. For example, in this rendering, I mean, the original one was a vector graphic, but I wanted to be able to use this image for marketing purposes and stuff. I wanted to come in and tweak it a little bit and use some of Photoshop's effects. The burn tool, for example, allows me to go in here and add, you know, some high quality shading that can't necessarily be done using vector art. There's some shading that can be done, I mean, with a little bit of work, but nothing like this. I can come in here and use the dodge tool to add some highlight right there. And in order to do that, I have to literally manipulate the mapped pixels. Of course, once I zoom in, you can see all the jagged edges. I mean, there's only so much you can do, and you cannot add pixels to something that's already there. I can increase the DPI, but all I'm doing is adding more pixels that represent the same exact pixels that are there. So the jagged edges are still going to be exactly the same. The blurriness is still exactly the same. So I'm not really helping myself in any way, shape, or form by doing that. Both image formats are perfectly relevant. You can use either one in order to create artwork, create content for Crazy Talk Animator or any other video production workflow. There are software that handle these type of situations a lot smoother than Crazy Talk Animator. After Effects, you know, you can use a lot of raster images at once because it has that rendering feature where it has to keep rendering all the frames, so you're able to work with it. CTA doesn't have that. Everything's done in real time. What happens when you import a heavy graphic into Crazy Talk? Okay, so in order to get a raster based image to look correctly inside of Crazy Talk, you're going to be zooming in and out on your character, so you want to avoid that jagged effect. So basically what you do is you have to create your stuff at a higher quality. Okay, from the start you make it at least twice as big as you need it, so that you can zoom in without that visual distortion. If you're going to zoom in more, then you're going to have to make your graphics more. And a lot of professionals, specifically, they try to, you know, cram as much quality as you have in there as you can get away with. But then again, most professionals have higher end computers. Here is a character. This is going to take a long time to import. This is a very heavy character. The bitmap graphics that were used to piece him together have a high pixel density that allows us to zoom in on the character without too much visual distortion. This is going to take a while, so we're just going to let it go in. All right, so I'm going to zoom in on the character. This character was created by taking photographs of the actual toy. So as I zoom in, I don't really necessarily start seeing too much visual distortion because of the high pixel density. Of course, because of the high pixel density, I can only use maybe 2 characters at once before my system starts bogging down. And if you're creating characters for use for sale in the marketplace, it's very important to keep this in mind. You don't want to create a character that has so much pixel density that it's going to cause your customer to not be able to use more than one of your characters, or not be able to have the background. I see this a lot, man. I see this a lot. I see people just creating characters willy-nilly. They want their stuff to look good, so they cram the pixel density in there. But the moment you add a second character, or you put another a bunch of props in there, a scene, the scenery, everything goes downhill. When we're playing this stuff right now, it's playing at 0 frames per second. Right now it's playing at, if you see here, it's playing at 52. It's variable, okay? So if you look on the upper left hand corner, all I'm doing is playing, and it's playing the static image, 52 frames per second average, 49, and it even though it's not even moving, the frame rate keeps going up and down because it's still having to render these pixels, okay, this high pixel density. The processor is having to work. Ideally, this should be steady at 60 frames per second right there. That's what you're looking for. Let me zoom out. So this character, I mean, he's composed of a lot of sprites that are bitmap based sprites, and that requires a lot of processing power. Okay, so this character, the average consumer, the average person would not be able to just drag and drop them into their stage and be able to work with them, because it does require more processing power. When we were working on the Batman Missions web series, I mean, we literally had one animator's computer blow up. That has nothing to do with Crazy Talk. Kind of does, not so much. As animators, we want to be able to have a lot of quality and stuff in there. So when the characters were pieced together, they were pieced together to have high resolution images. Unfortunately for this animator, the computer that he brought in for the purpose of working on this thing didn't have enough processing power. He drops 2-3 characters in there, starts messing around with it, overheats the system, overloaded it, not enough memory, not enough juice on his processor. He blew it up. I mean, literally blew. I know people use that word literally, kind of, liberally, but he literally blew up his computer. There was smoke and everything with these characters. Very heavy CPU intensive characters, all bitmap based. At the same time, you can have heavy bitmap vector based characters as well. This Billy character, most of my characters are optimized from the start, so I don't usually have that problem. When you use one of my characters, I mean, you can use 3, 4, 5, 6 different characters at the same time, and you won't notice any lag, even on the smallest machines. So you're usually pretty good about that. I'm running this right now at a steady 24 frames per second or so. It's not going up, it's not going down, he's not moving. And I got 3 different programs open. I'm going to close Flash. See, when I did that operation, my frame rate went down. My processor is having to work more for that. Now, I'm going to close Photoshop. Having to do that is going to put more strain on my processor. You're going to see that in the frame rate, 12 frames per second, 13, and he's not even doing anything. This is just kind of a little thing that you can use to kind of measure your processor. And I got my OBS studio thing running in the background right now, so it's adding an additional strain on it, so we're not going to get the full 60 frames per second right now, but that's fine. When we're actually animating, we want that to be there. Let's see here. Let's start a new project. That's going to force us to flush our memory. Going to bring in Billy again. And actually, I'm going to bring in the default Billy. It's because I just remember that that version of Billy is using a different jacket from a character that hasn't quite been fully optimized. So we're going to try it with the default Billy real quick. And we're going to try to get a little measurement, and we can see if we can get it stabilized. So we have it playing, stabilizing at 23, 23.8, 22, 23. So it's pretty much stabilizing itself at 23 frames per second. That's almost 24 frames per second. Technically, a computer 24 frames per second project runs at I believe 23.97 frames per second. So as long as we're there, we've got pretty much real time in terms of a 24 frame per second project. Anyways, that's not what we're here to talk about. When we're talking about vector graphics, on the other hand, let's see if we can get a demo going of how vector graphics are rendered. All right, it's coming up. So when I'm drawing my graphics on a program like Illustrator, Inkscape, Flash, I'm not really drawing real graphics. I'm basically plotting a series of mathematical functions that the software is going to translate and render in real time for me. This is what a line looks like. This is what an outline looks like when drawn with a shape. Okay, so a traditional line, that one is composed of a single row of different vector points and curve information, whereas something drawn with a brush tool usually has twice as much. I have my smoothing applied to it, so actually don't get an accurate representation. Let me turn off my smoothing so I can get a more accurate representation based on that outline up there. And it generally requires twice as much vector points, if not more, to create that. So notice the number of points that are required in here. Now, those are not required, that's just how it came out because of the smoothing. I can smoothen this a little bit more just to get a little bit more out of it. Let's see here. So there we go. So you can see that in order to create this shape, the vectors have to be plotted along the outlines, along the edges, all the way around. And what we see is actually the fill portion within the outline, within the shape. So drawing something with the brush tool generally requires twice as much vector points than drawing something with the outline tool. Now you do each one for aesthetic reasons. It doesn't matter why you do it. You choose basically what you want when you're drawing based on your own tastes. So I'm going to draw now a more advanced shape. Basically just drawing a simple cherry. And I'm actually going to turn on my smooth tool, my smooth modifier on this, because I like minimizing the number of points that are used. Okay. Just something that we can use to play around with and see. All right, so here we have a cherry. I'm going to smoothen it out a little bit, and we're going to take a look at the number of points that are used to create that. Notice the number of points that are being used to create that. The more number of points and curves, the more your processor is going to have to work in order to render this image. It's also the more amount of data that is used. So if I export this cherry, and I look at the file size, I can see that it's 4.23 kilobytes as is. All right. Now we're going to go in here, and I'm also going to export it as a PNG file. Now this basically maps out the pixels. There it is. So that's our 100% area right there. If I zoom in, of course, I start going into those pixelated stuff. We're going to drop those into Crazy Talk. So let's take a look at the performance here. We're not really doing anything. Okay, stabilizing itself at 23. It should stabilize itself around 22, 23. Right now, there's a lot less processes going on in the background, so I am getting a higher frame rate, so that's good. Let's bring in the props. Oh, let's measure the prop. The PNG version is 6 kilobytes. So it's almost twice as heavy as the vector-based one to begin. That's just file size alone. I'm gonna bring that PNG file as a prop. I'm gonna bring in that cherry as a prop. So here, I also have anti-alias turned off. I'm actually gonna turn it on real quick. I'm gonna have to restart my program. So let's talk about anti-aliasing real quick before I do that. Another thing that adds processing power, because vector graphics are being rendered in real time. As you can see here, when I zoom in, everything is nice and smooth. It looks very nice. The edges are nice and crisp. I mean, you see some jagged stuff in there, but that's just the curvature of that shape. You know, it doesn't have to be there. But the actual, there's no pixelation. There's another process taking place on top of this called anti-aliasing, and by nature, Flash also, or any vector program, would be rendering your stuff with that pixel data. If you notice here, you can see the little jagged edges. Okay, that's the vector base, that's the raw vector. It's just curvatures. Okay, it's just points along, it's just curves along points. And if you don't enable anti-aliasing, that's all you're going to get, and you're still going to get the pixelation. The only difference is the pixelation is at a 1-to-1 ratio. So even if you zoom in, those pixels are not going to get bigger. Okay, those pixels stay exactly 1 pixel wide, 1 pixel by 1 pixel big. So you get that little staircase effect, but you always get it at the 1 pixel level. Okay, those pixels are not going to get big, so you still get that high quality vector graphics. And this is something that's required or suggested when you have a lot of vectors and it's very complex. You know, just remove that extra layer, because basically what anti-aliasing is removing the aliasing. It's removing the distortion, that effect that's created by just having the raw data in there. It's very jagged. So what it's going to do is going to go from the subpixels here. It's going to basically, it's going to see that between here and here there's a little jagged, and it's going to interpolate another pixel in there, and it'll generate it live, so it smoothens it out. Hopefully that makes sense. So anti-alias, that's like a post process that's being done in real time. So when we add the anti-aliasing, we end up with no pixelation at all. We can zoom in. Looks beautiful, perfectly smooth. Zoom in some more. You're never gonna get that jagged effect. Personally, when I work in Crazy Talk, I turn off the anti-aliasing. It allows me to work with more stuff at once, because it's not having to render out that extra work. So here I have those 3 objects. Again, we're stabilized at around 20 something frames per second. That's okay, that's good. If I zoom in, I'm gonna get rid of this character, and I'm just gonna put the little apple next to itself. All right, and I'm gonna zoom in on those 2. You're gonna see the difference. Okay, as I'm zooming in, this thing has already exceeded its visual depth, you know, the size. So I'm already looking at it higher than 100%, so it's already starting to get blurry. This one is just as crisp on this side. You can see a little pixelation, but that pixelation is still, again, at the 1-to-1 ratio. If you can see my grid is set to be 1 pixel by 1 pixel by 1 pixel high and wide. So those pixels are always going to be perfect. All right. So I'm like really zooming in now. Okay, you can definitely see the difference in the outlines. Okay, you can see how blurry it's gotten, how jagged it's gotten. This one on this side, still perfectly crisp. Little bit of pixelation there, but that's the natural pixels. That's because I have anti-aliasing turned off. I'm gonna go ahead and close this project. And I know that I turned off I'm going to turn on the anti-alias, but I have to restart my program in order to be able to see the effects. Okay, so I'm relaunching it. And I'm going to open up that project. So now the images look a lot smoother, even this vector guy here. Okay, so not only is it redrawing all the vectors every frame that goes by, but it is also adding the anti-alias, which is interpolating additional pixels in between the pixels, in between the points. So when I put these 2 graphics side by side, do it this way. When I start zooming in, it doesn't take long before we start noticing the distortion on this side. This one, it's vector, but it also has the anti-aliasing turned on, so it further smoothens it out. So definitely you don't see any kind of pixelation on that one anymore. When we zoom in, the one on the right side, perfectly crisp. The one on the left side looks like crap. So here is where the discussion of vector graphics versus raster graphics come into play. When you create with raster graphics, you are dealing with this limitation here. You can only create so much before you start doing this. In general, if you just draw your stuff twice as big, you probably have enough room to work with as far as being able to zoom in and out of your characters, your props and stuff. Something like a table, I mean, it really has to be big and dense in order for you to be able to zoom in without losing the quality, because if you're doing it at maybe twice as big, you're still going to be zooming in on that table and you're going to need it to be bigger, so you're going to end up with this crap. This is the reason why I don't really recommend bitmaps. I'm highly against the use of bitmaps in 2D artwork for the primary stuff. It's pretty much useful for secondary things, backgrounds, some props, things where you require special effects, or things where you're definitely not going to be zooming in past a certain point. But if you want to have the most like professional versatility, you want to stick to the vector art. With characters that are built for, you know, crazy talk, definitely, you know, you gotta have vectors. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I just don't use G3 characters, and I don't see myself using that G4 architecture that's going to be coming out if it doesn't support vector art. If it doesn't support vector art, it's pretty much crap, you know. There's too much work involved, and the payoff is not, you know, there's not enough payoff. When you're selling your characters, your props, making your things available in the marketplace, you might have a situation where, you know, people are just not thinking, you know, they're creating stuff just because it looks nice, but then your customer gets it, they buy that character, and then they realize that either because you were focusing on the quality, you made it so dense that they can't use your character alongside somebody else's character or alongside certain prompts because of the amount of data that it's required to process that. Or simply you just, you know, did it at such a low density that the moment you zoom in, it gets all blurry. So optimization is very important. You know, if you're going to be dealing strictly with raster based images, you got to find your optimization point, you know, what you can comfortably get away with so that you can have more than one character on the screen at any given time, so you can animate and not have those type of setbacks. With vector graphics, from a visual standpoint, it's always going to look beautiful, but you also have to deal with the quantity of vectors that are required to draw a shape. So if your character is composed of a crap load of vector points, you know, those vectors have to be rendered in real time. So that's still going to cause a lag. That's still going to cause a performance issue. I'm going to show you a character that is not very optimized. It's a vector character. And it's one of the reasons why I have been very squeamish about releasing these character series. I'm gonna bring that one. That probably has something in there. Okay, so this is a vector-based creature. He looks beautiful. It's highly detailed, but there's no way that we can get away with this level of detail in vector format because it's having to redraw this, you know, at a high frame rate, and there's just so many vector points required to create that. Just this little area here with the scales have, you know, hundreds of little points in there, and then if you take into consideration that it's 10 different angles and all sorts of stuff. So here is when you would use a raster versus a vector thing, you know, when you require a high level of detail. If your graphic requires an extreme amount of detail, here's this like cityscape here, okay, I can render this out, I can convert it to a vector shape, into a vector symbol, into a vector graphic, but there's no way I'm going to be able to retain this level of quality. If I want to have a really nice, retain all the detail, then just use the bitmap based option. Okay, if your character requires some super advanced cell shading with you know, with the soft shading and the blending and stuff, you can't really do that in vector art easily. There's certain things you can do within the vector area, but it requires more processing, and at that point you're no longer, you might as well be using the raster based options. So I just you just have to kind of, you know, measure, outweigh what the benefits are. If your graphic is generally simple, like this cherry here, then, you know, stick to vector. You're going to be able to zoom in and out as much as you want. It's going to be nice. You know, you're always going to have the better option with the vector. But if you absolutely need something heavier, let me bring this into Photoshop. I can't find my open option. I'll just open up Photoshop separately, and I'll bring it in. So if we're doing vector, I mean, we can get away with certain things, you know, for vector. So let's say if I want to have the traditional cell shading, all right, I can do that with vectors. I can even simulate some level of soft shading. I can even simulate some level of soft shading. But it requires more data to be used. Let's see here. I'm just gonna So basically what I'm doing here is I'm creating a highly advanced series of vectors. Okay. Look at all these little points that it takes just to draw those soft shades and stuff, different bands of different level colors and stuff. In Photoshop, if I'm doing it all bitmap based, I can get away with some shading effects a lot easier, like the more advanced stuff. I mean, this one is all vector based, so it'll look perfectly fine regardless. But at that point, the processor is working harder. This one has the pixels already mapped out. I can come in here and try to burn these if I can. And that one's already burnt out as much as it's gonna go. Let's see if I can change the color a bit. I was trying to make this easier, but I used a color that's already burnt in. I'm gonna use a less extreme version of that color. That might help me achieve what I'm looking to do. It doesn't like that shade, that hue. See if that gives me more pixels to work with. That's another topic for another day. We gotta basically that has to do with basically the pixel brightness and stuff. When you have them at the highest points and stuff, there's only so much you can do with them at that point. See, at this point, we no longer have the fully burnt pixel, so I can come in here and just kind of burn these a little bit more. Give it more of a cel-shaded, kind of soft cel-shaded feel to it. I can dodge it. Doesn't work with pixels that are all fully burnt out. So by just doing that alone, I added an incredible number of pixels to that little graphic. And this is something that cannot be done with vector graphics. So if you want to have high levels of detail within the graphic, that's when ideally you have no choice, you know, but to use the raster graphics. You still have the same limitation. Save. But you have that nice little shading. Let's see if I can bring this down. Where's my crazy talk? I'm gonna zoom in. So of course at 100%, you know, that looks nice. It has like really nice shading and everything, something that cannot be achieved within the vector format. Once I zoom in, it becomes apparent that I can only keep it within a certain level. So that's your give and take. You know, that's the drawback. I could export, I could have created this image twice as big as I needed. Hey Adi, how's it going, man? And in doing so, I would be able to zoom in a lot more into it without the loss of quality. So here's all these jagged edges and stuff. Again, we look at the jagged edges on this one, perfectly crisp on that one. All right, so as far as the the debate between which to use and stuff. I mean, honestly, I'm always going to lean more towards the vector graphics side. It's more versatile. You can do a lot more with it. And ultimately, if you want to do stuff like for the self shading stuff, you can do it in post. For the character stuff, you absolutely need vector graphics. You know, you don't want the pixelation on the edges and stuff, especially if you want to create professional quality stuff. I don't have any faith in G3 characters. They require too much work. With the Photoshop stuff, very little payoff, and I definitely don't feel like the G4 stuff is going to be any different unless it supports vector artwork. You really need that for your main characters. You want to be able to zoom in on the face. You want to be able to zoom in on the eyes, the mouth. You want to do those close-up effects. And if you do that with raster graphics, then you have to basically have high density graphics in there in order to be able to zoom into that level. And of course, the more dense you have, the more pixel dense you have, the more processing power you're going to need, and the least amount of stuff you're going to be able to have at any given time. You might be able to get away with 3 characters, but will you be able to put in all your background elements, your props at the same time without any kind of trouble? Very difficult. I mean, it's kind of a balance. You're just gonna have to find your own balance between that. The vector graphics, just by the nature of the way they look, it's always going to be better. But also, you can't just draw willy-nilly. You know, you have to optimize your stuff. How do you optimize? Let's go through a few quick processes in order to kind of demonstrate how to optimize an object. Whenever you draw something in Flash, as stated before, you're drawing a series of plot points. So this this shape here has this many points in here. So the easiest way to optimize, of course, is actually, I'm gonna copy this so I can paste it later and do multiple examples. So I'm gonna select everything, modify, shape, optimize. This is the easiest method. You play around with the settings, and it actually gives you a preview of how it might look like. So here's at 32. It already did a dramatic reduction in the shapes. If I go all the way to 100, I might start seeing some distortion on the edges. If the distortion is not that bad, if you're willing to live with it, then just go straight for that. Or if you want to minimize it, just kind of come back down. All right, maybe something like that's good enough. Or, you know, just go all the way. 100, click OK. I reduced it by 66%. Okay, my original shape was composed of 115 curves. Now it's composed of 38. This one is severely more optimized. And if we compare it, let me see here. Here's the third chair. Here's the original one. Properties, 4.23 kilobytes. Here's the new one. Properties, 3.97 kilobytes. And this one has more data in it. This one actually has the cell shading in it, and it has more variable line widths on it because of the changes in the when we did the optimization thing. The cherry, the PNG one, original one, was already bigger. Properties, 6 kilobytes, 6.6 kilobytes, almost 7. And then the one with the additional cell shading that we did in Photoshop, it's the same shape, but all we did was change some colors around, added a bunch of like shading by, you know, the dodge and the burn tool. This is 39 kilobytes. That's insane for such a simple shape. But that's kind of the price you pay for those extra pixel information. So 39 kilobytes. Jesus, that's crazy. That's huge. And that's just a little cherry. So once you start putting that cherry on a bowl, and that bowl on a table, and that table on a floor, and you add walls to it, and you put a city background on it, and you put plants here, and then you drop your character. By that point, you're looking at this huge file that requires a lot of memory, a lot of processing power just to render in real time, or just to work, as you're working. So that is why optimization is important, using as little as possible, whenever possible, keeping everything nice and smooth, the least amount of data, especially with vector graphics, the least amount of points that you can get away with, the better. And, just because using less points doesn't mean you have to sacrifice quality. See, right here, I'm just going in there and just kind of adjusting the edges and stuff, making it look a little bit more my taste. It works. So now I saw a question on the Crazy Talk Animators, Crazy Talk Animator users group regarding the conversion of a bitmap file or a raster based image into a vector. There's only a couple reasons you would want to do this. I'm gonna take this image of Billy, I'm gonna import it into Flash, and I'm gonna use the modify bitmap trace bitmap function. I'm gonna leave this by default right now, minimum area, blah blah blah. I'll hit preview. Okay, using these settings, Flash does a pretty reasonable attempt at converting the image that I brought in into a graphic. Now, if this image was very simple, it didn't have too many colors, it didn't have too many things, it would be more accurate. So this is when you start playing around with it, like a corner threshold, let's say many corners, and I want a tight fit. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, I see a little bit more edges and stuff. Minimum area, I mean, I can go for the pixel. So now it goes down to the pixel level. I mean, I still end up with a pixelated shape because it's basically vectorizing a pixel-based image, and it's giving me a really, really tight fit. I'm gonna go for color threshold. Let's see, 200. See what that looks like. Okay, that's crazy looking. Let's try 10. All right, so I got a little bit closer to what I needed. So then we're gonna go to adjusted many corners, see what that looks like. It kind of gives me a little bit better curve fitting. I'll try the very tight option. Okay, let's try the very smooth option. Okay, that seems to blend in our edges a little bit more. All right, so basically right now we have a converted image from bitmap to vector. Now, when I zoom in, I can see all this sort of stuff that takes place because of all the different colors that were along those edges, okay? So converting a bitmap image is always going to give you some kind of a painterly effect. This is actually not bad for certain things. If you're creating things for like a background and you want to make it look painterly, that's good. That's fine. I don't recommend it. If you're going to have images that, I mean, if you think that converting it to a vector is going to make it more efficient, that's not true, because those to recreate that, it's going to require more vector points in order to try to approximate it. It's not going to look the same, and it's going to use more vector objects. Let's see here. So I'm going to bring in this this image here of this cityscape. Now this image is 9 megabytes by itself, okay? As a background element, maybe you can use it as a background element. Now, if this was like a painted background or something like that, I mean, the level of detail, the more detail you have in it, the more that I would go with the raster-based images. So I have this here, and it kind of looks like that. I can use it inside of the thing, and it's still only 9 megabytes, okay? I'm going to attempt to convert this to a vector-based image. It's going to take a while. It's not going to give me a very accurate representation, and you're always welcome to play around with the settings to get your own results, but it is going to give me a painterly effect. It's going to make it look, please change your too many colors in the bitmap. Yeah, no duh. Let's try 50. And it is going to give us a painterly effect because it's going to try to approximate it's going to try to approximate our shape, our objects. So, I mean, we're going to end up with something that looks fairly close to what we started with, but the number of vectors that it takes to render that is so much that it's usually not worth it. If you're going to be doing that just to achieve the painterly effect, then at that point, it's almost there. Then at that point, what I would suggest is convert it back to a bitmap, because it's still going to be less complex than the vector-based one. So here's this shape, how it kind of turned out. And we are dealing with a vector shape at this point. It's still having to catch up. There's a lot of vectors involved in this, so it's having to work extra hard to just kind of render this for me. Let me get rid of this background. So like these trees and stuff, man, that's a lot of data right there. So I'm gonna export this. I'm going to take a quick look at the properties. All right, from a vector standpoint, it's only 472 kilobytes. But I mean, we had lost a lot of data, you know. It's somewhere down there. But we have lost a lot of data in being able to render that. I'm gonna bring it into Crazy Talk. And we can compare them. So even though it's only 470 something kilobytes, there is a lot of data in there. Like, look, Crazy Talk is complaining already. There are too many shapes in this SWF file which may result in unusual performance. Are you sure you want to import this file? This is just one file. That's just one background element that I'm bringing in. Now, this is the kind of stuff that you have to deal with when you're creating an entire character. You know, the sprites alone, I think it's like 30 mouths per angle. You're dealing with 300 mouth shapes. The eyes, you know, I think it's like 11 different eye sprites per angle. duplicate them because it's two eyes. I mean, there's a lot of crap that goes into like making a G2 character, for example. So you got to optimize your vectors. I mean, this is just one graphic. So imagine if I have two G2 characters against this one graphic, trying to animate this, it's gonna be a pain in the ass. It's taking forever to bring it into CTA. So you can do that. I mean, then there's some techniques that you can use. For example, if you're inside of Photoshop first, you can use the posterize feature to reduce the number of colors that are used. So I can take this image now, export it, and render it, you know, vectorize it, and it'll be a lot more efficient. Same thing, I could have done that with that city. This is going to take a while. There's a lot of data in here that CrazyDoc is having to process, if it even works. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't work, if it just crashes. I don't recommend just like stuff like this that you do it. I'm doing it because I want to be extreme about my demonstration, but you know, stuff like this, you can be stylistic about it. You know, file, filter. Let's try to get some kind of some kind of effect, filter gallery. Let's try that. Let's see what we have in here. So we can do some kind of filtering to it to kind of give it like a non-realistic feel to it from the start. Okay, maybe something like that. All right, so we apply some kind of non-photorealistic filter type of thing to it. So we already end up with something that looks a little bit more fake, but it has less color information. We can go in here, adjustments, posterize. Okay, the higher the number, the more realistic. The less the number, the less colors you're using. So we can do that. Maybe a 4. All right, so we have stuff that's that. So that alone has reduced the color information that takes that's required. We might do ourselves a service by removing this this greenery, because we can always recreate that by some other means. All right, so that removes a lot of data from it. We could probably get rid of the background from the start. But we don't necessarily have to. And we can add additional layers where we can do other image effects to it just to make it less realistic, and we can use it, we can pass it off as, you know, somehow drawn or rendered. Threshold is a good one. It completely removes the color information, leaving it, you know, just 2 colors. So that's something that could be used. So something like this could be easily converted to a vector. I'm gonna call this black. So you can use stuff like this for the purpose of working with cartoons in Crazy Talk Animator. Let me see if CTA ever responded. It didn't. It's, I mean, that image is useless. So even though it worked, you know, it's useless. I'm gonna have to cancel this out. Eventually it'll import, but it's just having to render, it's having to interpret all that data. So I'm just gonna start it again. We're gonna forget about using it. It's down here somewhere. So it's very impractical. So, you know, here just selecting it inside of Flash is taking forever just to create that selection, and working with it, it's just so much data in there to create that. It's not even worth the effort. I'm gonna wait for Flash to respond again. I'm just gonna close that. Don't want it, don't need it. We're gonna move on. All right, so we're gonna bring in that new image that I kind of optimized inside of Photoshop. This black one. That looks nice. I get the silhouette. I get what I want out of it. I can use it as a background element fairly easily. And I can probably get away with using it as a vector because of the simplistic nature of it at this point. It still looks realistic as a silhouette, but it's got such little color information that I can probably get away with vectorizing it. Maybe even smoothing it out even more. Okay, so I end up with something like that. I can get rid of the background fairly easily. Isolate those black areas. And I can do all sorts of fancy stuff with it now. So this is something that you can do to improve the quality of your stuff. It doesn't take that much, but I mean, I gave up a lot of the quality. You know, I'm not getting the realistic stuff, but this is for cartoon purposes, man. This is nice. I'm gonna export this. It probably still has a lot of shapes that could be further optimized. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and run an optimization pass on it. Modify, shape, optimize. I'm going to go to 100. Click OK. 0% reduction. It was pretty much optimized from the beginning, I guess. Let's try this one. Modify. It's as good as it's gonna get, I guess. Yeah, it optimized it during the conversion process, so that's good. It's good to know. So I exported it. There's the city, I think. Yep, that's it right there. Going to Crazy Talk, drop it in there. It's telling me that it has a unsupported tag. That's because we're working with an ActionScript 3 project. I didn't have any complaints about the rendering, but it still kind of gave me some crazy stuff here. So I am gonna have to come in here and tweak some things. Select this. Another way to optimize is just smoothing things out a little bit. Click the smooth button. I'm gonna optimize this one some more. Hit the smooth button. And all we're doing is reducing the number of vectors that are in there. So that should be enough in most cases. In many cases, you just gotta keep doing it. And we'll see how it renders this one out. Still doing it. All right, we're gonna tweak it some more. I'm gonna look for random little pieces. I don't really see anything. There's a couple things up here. Crazy Talk is not a big fan of like all these little loose things. Okay, that seems to be giving me better results. There's so much data in there that there's no telling where the culprit is. In some cases you'll just get lucky. Let's see if we can run that optimization again. After I modified it, it should have introduced some more curves. All right, 7% reduction. Let's try it one more time, see if we can go some more. Okay, another 18%. Let's do one more. %. It's getting to the point where it's not able to optimize too much. Let's see how efficient it is now. Boom, we finally got it. We finally optimized it to the point where Crazy Talk has no trouble interpreting it. And yeah, it's not that bad. Let's see here, scene. Let's see if we can put it within the context of something. That's just a picture. I thought it was an actual window. Let's try this other one. There we go. So we're able to use something that looks a little bit more realistic, but still stylized for cartoon purpose, and it came from a picture. Not too bad. I mean, there's all sorts of ideas that you can generate from that. But ultimately, the vector stuff is going to be for more simplified forms. Yes, it's going to be a lot better in terms of crisp and quality and stuff. The raster based stuff is for things that need to be more highly detailed, and you can't get away with a vector thing, because when you're using the vector, it becomes more complex, and you just get into trouble that way. So that's where the balance comes in. If you need it, if you need more high degree of detail, use the raster stuff. If you need a just high degree of quality but you don't need the actual things to have so much details, it's the vector all the way. And pretty much all characters are going to call for that vector format. Backgrounds, traditionally the backgrounds are hand painted and stuff. They look really nice, and they got the painterly effect. Bitmapped images are probably the best choice for that, so draw your own conclusions on that. Hopefully that little demo also gave you some ideas on how to work with different things. I could have also brought in that colored version. I kind of chose to go with the black and white one because it gave me a more stylistic effect. But that's another method that you can use to do things. So hopefully you enjoyed this little talk today, and if you like these type of talks, you want to keep be notified when I go live, just basically subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon. That way whenever I go live, you get notified. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments section. And other than that, go to toontitan.com, check out some of my characters, check out some of the assets that we have available there. If you have ideas and suggestions for other topics, send them my way. If you want me to take a look at your project live, we can do that as well. Just kind of take a look and see how we can fix it. This was actually kind of fun. Hopefully it gave you guys a lot of new insight on vector graphics versus raster graphics. So have a great day, guys.